Questions. Food for Thought by Thomas Griffiths. What is the capital of the United States? Many of you who either live in the United States or know your geography would have had Washington, D.C. appear in your subconscious. Why was I able to divert your attention to something you would probably think is completely unrelated to this essay? Because a question was introduced. Questions are powerful tools. In fact, every question stimulates some degree of concentration. Questions are the foundation for human advancement and potentially the key to a higher level of intelligence. Questions lead to discovery. It's unlikely for someone to jump from a problem to the solution without some kind of transition. For example, I arrived on time to math class one day, and the professor decided to give us one of his curveballs again, so he asked us to find the derivative of x to the x power. At first I thought, how on earth are you supposed to find the derivative of a variable with a variable exponent? I just could not see a solution to this conundrum. The professor, seeing our lack of understanding, asked another question. What would you use to bring the exponent down? Finally we understood, and we all thought, of course, logarithms. The professor often gives us problems that have to be simplified first before it can be solved. He expects us to ask ourselves, can it be simplified further before I move on? In math, if I'm having some difficulty interpreting the problem, I ask questions like, what's the first step? Or what kind of problem is it, and what formulas should I be using to solve it? By implementing this technique, my mind begins to familiarize itself with the kind of problem that it is and the steps that should be taken to solve the problem. When in doubt, I ask questions. If not, I ask questions anyway. When a question is introduced, our minds automatically run a search for relevant information associated with the question. Questions induce thought and often lead to subordinate questions. When we ask questions, we exercise our minds. If I am given a problem to solve and I get distracted, I will repeat the question out loud, and voila, focus is restored. Questions can be used to direct or redirect our attention. I have found this to be extremely useful in learning to play tennis. I rode my bike to the tennis courts one day to practice, and I quickly discovered, to my dismay, that I just could not get the ball over the net. So I asked myself, what am I doing wrong? As I kept practicing, I deduced that my swing must be causing the problem. So I asked myself, what's wrong with my swing? This directed my attention to my tennis racket during the rally. With this question in mind, and as I watched my tennis racket out of the corner of my eye, I found that my tennis racket was consistently at the wrong angle. Finally, I just made the necessary adjustments, and I could play adequately again. If I hadn't asked those questions, I would not have been watching my tennis racket, and I would not have improved that day. Who, what, where, when, why, and how? These questions should all be addressed whenever we encounter something strange or interesting. If we take the time to consider all six, we explore almost every aspect of the observation. This often leads to new insight and inspiration. As we practice asking these questions, we become more observant. I remember one day when I spotted a slightly bent stop sign, and I surprised even myself when I asked, who could have done this? What could have caused this? Why did this happen? When did this happen? How did this happen? And was it like this originally? We can learn a lot from even the most insignificant detail, especially by asking questions. If I stop asking questions, it's almost as if I'm letting my body take control for a while. The brain is programmed to act for itself. In questioning ourselves, we become self-aware. One discovers their true identity by asking the big questions, like who am I, and what do I want? One way to question ourselves is practice dialectical thinking. Whenever I make a statement of opinion, I ask myself, what if you're wrong? And are you sure? Another good question to ask is, why do I think that? I and my express individuality. We can learn just as much about ourselves by asking questions as we can about the world we live in. Are you beginning to see why questions are so important? As I have learned just how powerful questions can be in redirecting our attention, solving problems, and raising self-awareness, I have added question everything to my list of mottos. We debate by asking questions and exchanging answers. We are, or should be, always asking questions. When what is happening in your world doesn't make sense, when it doesn't conform to your beliefs about how things should work, it's time to ask hard questions. Question everything. Remember, questions lead to discovery, stimulate concentration, and can be used to raise self-awareness. This I believe.